and what we seem are but a dream within a dream.
Well, young ladies, we are indeed fortunate in the weather for our picnic to Hanging Rock. Once again, let me remind you, the rock itself is extremely dangerous. You are therefore forbidden any tomboy foolishness in the matter of exploration, even on the lower slopes. I also wish to remind you, the vicinity is renowned for its venomous snakes and poisonous ants of various species. It is, however, a geological marvel. That is all. Have a pleasant day, and try to behave yourselves in a manner to bring credit to the college.
Stopped at 12. Never stopped before. Must be something magnetic.
Everything begins and ends at exactly the right time and place. You must learn to love someone else apart from me. I won't be here much longer.
Hello and welcome to Emma of TV Movie Club Now Playing. I'm Beth and I am 50% of the Made for TV Movie Club podcast, where we review and recap TV movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Here on our YouTube channel, we review more current TV and film projects, although we are also interested in some restored projects from the late 20th century. And as our listeners of the podcast know, we do love all things TV and movie from the late 20th century. This channel allows us to show our love, though, for the more modern entertainment industry. With that being said, let's begin. So today I want to talk about a movie called Picnic at Hanging Rock that was released in 1975. It's been restored and is now showing in limited theater runs. I was so lucky to be able to see this movie at the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee. If you have not ever been there, if you ever find yourself in Milwaukee and you love old movie theaters, try and see a movie at the Oriental. It was built in 1927 and it largely remains the same as it was when it was built. It was considered a movie palace and was built for the silent movie era. It has a beautiful sort of Indian theme. There's actually a balcony in one of the theaters. I think it was probably 2 years ago, saw Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads concert film that was made. They did I think it's a 40th anniversary release of it, and they're actually still playing it, I think, once a month or something on Saturday nights, at least once a month on Saturday nights, still playing there. But it was so cool because this theater that we were in, there's actually 3 theaters in there, but this one had a lot of space sort of behind the seats. So people were up and dancing. I've never seen anything like it. It was so much fun. And this theater is so beautiful. When you go in and you sit down at your seat, you can just look up at the ceiling and you're going to find things that you've not seen before previously. It's just so beautiful. It's historic. Movies are actually not ridiculously expensive. They have concessions. You can get wine. I think they have wine and beer. If you want to have an alcoholic beverage, they of course have a soda machine. They have water, popcorn. I think the popcorn is like $8 or $10 for a large. It's made in-house, it's fresh, it's delicious, and I highly recommend if you ever find yourself in Milwaukee, after you go down and see yourself the Fawn statue, go up and see a movie at the Oriental Theater. So Picnic at Hanging Rock is one of the more unusual movies that I've ever seen, and there's a lot of reasons for this. But first, I wanted to mention that it is directed by Peter Weir. Peter Weir, he also directed The Truman Show, Mosquito Coast, Witness, The Year of Living Dangerously. Those were all huge movies in the 80s and 90s. The movie was co-written by Joan Lindsay, who also wrote the novel. The novel came out in 1967. There is also a six-episode series on Amazon that came out in 2018. I have not seen that, although it is on my list because after seeing this movie, I actually really can't stop myself from thinking about it. It's so interesting because I'm going to give a little bit of spoilers. So if you don't want to know a lot about the movie, then maybe this isn't the review for you. But in order to talk about the movie itself, we have to talk about what happened. And from the outset, I will tell you that the resolution in this movie has left a lot of people to be desired. However, it does have a very sort of true story feeling about it. It gives true story vibes, like based on a true story vibe. It is set in 1900 on Valentine's Day in Victoria, Australia. Set at it's called Appleyard College, which is a private school for girls. Apparently, I think in Australia they call private schools colleges. Where in the United States we call private school a private school, and college is where you would go for college or university post high school. So it was a little bit confusing at first because I was like, these girls do not look like they were in college. And it's true, they were younger teenage girls, probably high school age. For those of you in the United States, that would be the high school. So teachers, Miss McCraw and Miss Depoitier, are the chaperone for these girls who go on Valentine's Day to a picnic at Hanging Rock. One of the girls, named Sarah, she's an orphan and she has to stay behind with the headmistress, Mrs. Appleyard, which we find out later it's because somebody was paying her tuition. Like I said, she's an orphan, and that person had stopped paying tuition, so she was no longer able to do things like take dance class or extracurricular activities like going to Hanging Rock for this picnic. So while at Hanging Rock, the girls are sort of just chilling out, and some are reading, some are just talking, some are just relaxing. Miranda, Marion, Irma, and Edith go exploring. They climb a rock and then they fall asleep, and it's kind of weird circumstances because there's sort of a strange humming noise in the background, and you're not really sure what that means. But when they waken, they're sort of in a trance and kind of march without paying any attention to what's going on around them into a hidden crevice. Well, three of the girls do. Edith doesn't. In fact, she watches the girls and then she starts screaming in terror and she flees back down to the group, and we cut away. And the next scene is very late at night, hours past when they were supposed to return. They return back to the school and they tell the headmistress that the girls disappeared, but also Miss McCraw has now disappeared. They don't say really much about anything about that, except for that later on Edith says she saw her without her some of her clothing on, which back then was kind of a scandal anyway because they are fully clothed from head to toe. And in fact, when they leave for the picnic, the headmistress tells them that they are allowed to take their gloves off after they get through town where they won't be seen again. So in the meantime, there's this very large and lengthy search for the girls by some of the people in town. They spend quite a good amount of time there, and a young man who saw them at Hanging Rock that day named Michael sort of becomes obsessed with finding the girls. And it's very interesting because he ends up finding one of the girls. But what's interesting about this movie is that we don't find out what happens to the girls or what happened to the girls. And yet the movie is so engaging that it almost doesn't matter how it ends, that we don't really have any resolution. I saw the movie with a friend and we had a really long talk about it on the way home, and because we were trying to figure out what really happened with these girls and what happened with the town. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether a movie is sort of, if it's a sign of the time. So is it because of the that it was the 70s that it was filmed that it sort of had some of the tone, or is it because it was intentional by both the writer and the director. So those are some things that really left me wondering about the film itself. There are some very interesting twists that I did not see coming at all. There was one, in fact, that I feel like I should have seen coming, but I did not. And so there are some resolutions at the end that are very satisfying and interesting and also very thought-provoking because you're like, how did that happen? What happened? Some further instances. And that's what sort of keeps me thinking about the film. And one thing I found out later on was that when we were driving home, when we were doing some research, because we're like, what happened? And one of the things we found out was that there was a final chapter in the novel, but it was actually removed and was later published posthumously by Joan Lindsay, who was the writer of the film and the novel, or one of the co-writers of the film, but she wrote the novel. And it's interesting because I said to my friend, I don't think that I would have particularly enjoyed this film if it had ended the way it did with this final chapter that was not published initially. And she agreed with me. And so I'm curious if you've seen the film and if you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to give anything more away about the movie and how it ends, then if I do, it'll probably seem like too much. But if you've seen the movie, I'm really curious to know what you thought of. So please do comment below. And if you know about this extra chapter, I'm curious what you would think if you had actually seen the movie with this extra chapter or read the book with the extra chapter. So, I saw it probably a couple weeks ago, and I'm still thinking about it because it was such a really well-made film. It's very slow moving, and some of that could be 1970s, some of that could be because they're trying to make it look like it's the 1900s. There are some strange things about it. In fact, Miranda, who has a very modern name, right? Like Miranda was probably not as common a name in the 1900s, but her hair itself was kind of telling because it's very 70s and probably not something that girls would have maybe worn in the 1900s because her hair was fully flowing down. There was a little bit of a sort of wave in it that looked to be a little 70s. And so it's hard to say, like you're wondering, like, was that intentional or is it not intentional? My friend also pointed out that some of the clothing that they were wearing seemed to be a little bit more modern, although it was hard to tell if they meant it to be more modern to give us sort of a feel of like what's really going on here, or if it was just the way that they costumed the movie for making it look like the 1900s, even though it was the 1970s. So those are some questions that I had about the film and that made me really wonder, like, what really happened to these girls? One of them does come back, but there are no answers because she claims to have amnesia. And in the midst of all of this, sort of the girls' school falls apart and sort of the town kind of they just they start to, I think, question each other, question themselves, question like what is happening, even though they seem to spend a lot of time up at Hanging Rock trying to find these girls. There's a lot of groups of people out there. There's in particular a photographer out there, which is also very unusual because in the 1900s it was much more difficult to take pictures, and they show like newspaper clippings, which is really interesting because even if you think about it, even in 1970s, except for television, really the way that we communicated or learned about the news of the world was through newspapers. And of course, there were some magazines like Newsweek and stuff, but that is in 1900 how they learned about what was going on in the world. And can you imagine like seeing an article like that and then maybe never even finding a follow-up or hearing anything else about it? And then having sort of this town that kind of falls apart because of these girls going missing and nobody knows what happens. And they never do. Like I said, there is no resolution, but I actually think that it was intentional, but I also think it was okay. I didn't mind not having that sort of fulfilled ending that we find that we need in modern films, because here I am again, like I said, 2 weeks later, and I'm still thinking about this film and I'm still going over in my head, like what was happening, what was this about? What was that about? So I really enjoyed it. And I think if you get a chance to see it, especially now that it's been restored, it was like in beautiful condition. And the photography was beautiful. This hanging rock is gorgeous. So there's a lot of outdoor scenes that are just really beautiful. And I think even the acting is outstanding. It's really well cast. It's a good solid story. It's very well written, and it is definitely worth watching. And if you get a chance to see it in a historic theater like the Oriental, I highly recommend doing that. So I wanted to thank you for watching. If you want more content, please feel free to listen to our audio podcast, the Made for TV Movie Club, on your favorite podcast app. And you can find us on our socials, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads. And you can just search for us, search for the Made for TV Movie Club podcast. And I will put the link below to our audio podcast if you want to watch. So again, I really appreciate you paying attention, and leave a comment below so I know you watched us.